Hello, I'm Russell Pointon of Edison Group. I lead on consumer research at Edison Group. Today, delighted to have with me Charles Nelson, Senior NED of London Tunnels. I'm pretty sure Charles won't mind me letting you know that he has plenty of experience in financial services. And he's here today to talk about London Tunnels, which listed in Amsterdam in June this year. It's a company which has a very interesting set of assets with great history, and they're looking to develop it into a very interesting visitor attraction in the next few years. Hello, Charles. How are you?
Russell, thank you very much. Very nice to be here, and thanks very much to the Edison team for hosting this webinar that I'm going to present on about the London Tunnels. I'll obviously give you a good introduction in terms of what the London Tunnels is and what our plans are for the project and for the company going forward. But just before I do that, I just wanted to touch on that you don't really get the impact of these tunnels unless you actually go down and see them for yourself. And I'll let you know later on in the presentation about how you can do that. But there is the ability for investors, we prioritize investors to go down and see the tunnels and see for themselves, see for yourselves what we're actually talking about, because it is an amazing space and will be an amazing attraction when it's finalised in 2028. Anyway, I'll go into that a little bit later on. But just to kind of follow on from what Russell was talking about, so the London Tunnels, we are listed on Euronext in sterling. Our sponsors, ABN AMRO, for the listing, advised us on accessing the market in Europe. We're very proud to have kind of achieved that in June of this year. But you can also go and buy the shares away on retail platforms like Hargreaves Lansdown, AJ Bell, Interactive Investors. So there's plenty of opportunity to share in the UK as well as on the Euronext exchange. So the idea is what we're trying to do, bringing these tunnels to life. So these were a set of tunnels which were built during the war, and they were built because of the Blitz. And so the British decided that they wanted to obviously protect the London population from the bombing, and a series of tunnels were planned, and some of them were built, some of them weren't. But they were built for the war. These particular tunnels lie underneath the Central Line in Holborn. They're extremely long and large. But we're talking about tunnels in total around 1 mile in length. They comprise, and I'll show you a schematic in a second, comprise two long tunnels and 4 stubbier, bigger tunnels. And what we're proposing to do with these tunnels is effectively redevelop them. We're not building anything; they're already there. We've got planning permission. I'll go into that in a few minutes. We are developing these tunnels to look at and basically show what happened during the war, celebrate the people who not only built them but who were meant to be housed in them during the war. And most people will know that during the Blitz, 43,000 people were killed under German bombing raids. And these tunnels are there to kind of be as a memorial to those people who lost their lives. And there's a lot of people in the UK still whose family were involved either in the war or in London during the Blitz. And we think this will be a very interesting destination for them to come and visit. So the main thing is we're turning these tunnels into a heritage and history attraction, but also because of the sheer scale of them, we're able to do some other things. So we're going to offer a cultural tourist attraction. So art and culture will be a large part, and I'll go into that in a few minutes. But the combination should be an extremely interesting and exciting prospect for visitors over the coming years. To give you a feel for how we're looking at the project, it's very much similar to both the London Eye and Madame Tussauds in its scale. We're talking about potential of up to 3 million people per annum. It's a very simple model. You basically take the ticket price, take your costs, you've got your revenue, and you can derive a valuation on the back of that. And when you look at both of those other two projects, we think the valuations for them somewhere between 600 and 900 million pounds. And when you look at those projects, which are the two largest tourist attractions in the UK, and what I mean by that is not including the museums, etc., but tourist attractions where visitors will pay ticket prices for, they are both at full capacity. So there is this opportunity, we believe, for another attraction of the scale to be in the centre of London, attracting visitors from outside of London and from within London. Summarise, what we're trying to do is really tell the history and also offer this kind of cultural experience similar to what we would say to Atelier de Lumière, if anyone knows that, in Paris, or Team Labs in Tokyo. So it should be a very exciting opportunity. So let me just go on to the first slide. So this summarises the project. So first of all, we think we're going to be the last major history and heritage attraction that can reopened or opened in central London. You think of the problems about getting planning permission for anything above ground of that scale, and there have been a number of attempts made in London and not in central London in recent years, which have all been knocked back by planning. We think this is unique. It's kind of monopolistic. It's not a monopoly, but it's monopolistic in its characteristics. And it's right in the city, in the centre of London. It was the largest network of tunnels built for people in any city in the war. And the reason for that was because of the Blitz. None of the other major cities during the war either had time to do anything like this because they were taken over so quickly, or they were too far away to really bother about bombing raids. So this is a unique set of tunnels. To give you an idea of scale and size, similar in diameter to Eurostar, the biggest tunnels, you could drive 3 double-decker buses down those tunnels side by side. There's a unique history. I'll talk a little bit more about the history, but you've obviously got the Blitz. When they were completed in 1942, the Blitz had kind of dissipated. And so they were used for various things. So they were never used for purpose. They could have housed up to 9,000 people at any one time, but when they were completed, never used for purpose. And then they were used for a bunch of different things, including SOE during the war, the Special Operations Executive. And we believe at the time that Ian Fleming, who was a naval liaison officer to SOE, he would have visited these tunnels. We're sure he would have visited these tunnels. And they became Q Branch effectively. So when you look at the James Bond novels, that's where he got his inspiration for. They were Q Branch. And, we go into the history of that in the tunnels as well. Then after the war, they passed on to the post office and they became an underground telephone exchange and were actually the termination point between Washington and the Kremlin, and were it was the way that the Kremlin and Washington talked during the Cuban Missile Crisis to try and dissipate the threat there of nuclear war. So they've got an incredible history. They were used as reserve war rooms. They've been used, as I said, for telephone exchange. So they've had a number of different uses in terms of storage. The Public Records Office was down there for a while. So there's an incredibly rich history to them, which we want to celebrate in the project. You kind of layer all of that on top because we think obviously they're an interesting destination. But layer on top that London is the most visited Western city in the world. When you look at how many visitors come into London, it's above Paris, it's above New York. 20 million or so visitors come into London every year. So not only have you got this huge, phalanx of tourists coming into London, which we believe will grow, and we think the government will continue to encourage that. You've also got a population around London of around 20 million, and domestic tourists. We think at any time there's 50 million or so people who are coming into London on an annual basis, which kind of means that this is a very exciting attraction, we think, for people who want to visit the city. We also, because of the history of this, one of the things, and I'll show you some of the statistics a little bit later, there has been a huge media attention on this project. Over 6.3 billion people, we believe, were reached with the media campaigns around 30 odd countries since we announced we were going to develop the tunnels. So we think there is plenty of interest, which will relate back into the tourists coming into London. Now have full planning permission, full planning approvals from both City of London councils and Camden County Council, Camden Council, to develop the tunnels. Obviously, really important, but as you could imagine, these approvals were given unanimously because they can see the value of the tunnels as a project for bringing tourists and creating wealth, both in London and in Camden. As I mentioned, very simple structure. We think very comparable to both the London Eye and Madame Tussauds and its attraction. So here's a schematic of the tunnels. What we've done is take out, obviously, the surface. These are the kind of bigger diameter tunnels, the 4 tunnels which run into the longer tunnels. And what you can see is this is under Chancery Lane Tube Station. You have Holborn, obviously, to the west, and the City of London to the east. But you see the kind of scale of them there. And then here we have the actual network of tunnels. Very luckily, as I mentioned, post-war, they were taken on by the Post Office, who constructed a number of construction shafts to allow their equipment and people to get down into the tunnels when they were using them for a telephone exchange. That means that we could get planning approvals to develop the tunnels for tourist use, because without evacuation ability, or at least 2 shafts, and we've got 3, you would not be able to get planning approval. So there are, as I mentioned, there were some other tunnels in London constructed for the same reason. None of them have those shafts in place, and they don't have the ability to actually build those shafts. So this kind of backs up our view that this is a monopolistic project in that respect. Nothing more to say really there. You've got the 2 entrances in Fulwood Place and Furnival Street, and the 4 parallel tunnels, which are the kind of wider diameter tunnels, and going into one of the longer tunnels, which are each 400 metres long. This gives you a feel for where they are in London. They are 20-minute walk from both Tate Modern or the British Museum. 13 minutes you can walk into Covent Garden. We think that's quite important because 40-odd million people visit Covent Garden every year. So a very easy walk in a great position in London. As I mentioned, we got full planning permission from the City of London. And here's a statement by the chairman. And also with Camden Council and their statement as well, all kind of fully backing this project. So this is an actual picture of one of the longer tunnels, so the smaller diameter ones. You can see this equipment. This was equipment used by the Post Office, generating equipment to power the exchanges. We're going to be leaving a lot of this equipment in the tunnels as part of the heritage history, part of the attraction. We will be stripping out some of the other bits as well. There are some exhausts here which need to come out, etc. But that is how the tunnels look. So these are massively over-engineered tunnels. You can imagine when they were built, they had to support up to 9,000 people. They were built by hand and massively over-engineered. So we don't need any of these tunnels other than put our equipment in there for the attraction. This is a picture of one of the wider diameter tunnels. Absolutely huge. As I said, you could fit 3 double-decker buses side by side down there. Just as an aside, to actually buy these tunnels, and we're buying them currently off BT, we're in the process of buying them off BT, we had to get permission from the Secretary of State to buy them as they sit 10 metres below the central line. So what are we planning to do? So there are three parts to this experience. So first part, as I mentioned, history and heritage. I've talked about the London bit. It's going to be the story of what happened in London. It's going to be a memorial to the 43,000 people who died in the Blitz and other bombing raids around the UK. We think it's going to be a very special place for families and Europeans and Brits to come and see, what was built to defend them during the war. We're going to, have displays around the Special Operations Executive. As you can imagine, we are partnering or looking to partner with the armed forces, to get, whatever the displays which we think are going to be interesting for the tourists to look at. So partnerships are going to be all important for the way we develop these going forward. And again, it's a memorial. I mean, one of the things, people don't necessarily realize about a Special Operations Executive, there were 13,000 people as part of that, which was founded by Winston Churchill during the war, of which over 3,000 were women, and a number of both the men and the women who were executed during war by the Germans. We feel this is a kind of fitting tribute to them. Q Branch, as mentioned, it was Ian Fleming's inspiration for Q Branch, and it was also the reserve war rooms, as well as being the kind of endpoint for the communications exchange for the Cuban Missile Crisis. So that's the history and heritage element, which is going to be mainly the longer tunnels, and then in the cultural experience, which I mentioned, think of Atelier de Lumière or Team Lab in Tokyo. We are really excited that we're going to be teaming up with a number of groups to put on some amazing experiences down in those tunnels using kind of the latest technology, and that we think is going to bring in people not only just on a one-off basis to go to the heritage part of it, but also on an ongoing basis as we change those displays. And then finally, it actually does have when we've got approval for it, the deepest licensed bar in the world, we believe. This was a bar which was set up by the post office when they took on the tunnels after the war for their staff. And as I said, we've got approval, and this will be part of the experience. So when you go down into the tunnels, you'll be able to buy a ticket to go into the bar, have your martini taken maybe with a picture of James Bond beside you, and then post the time when the tourist attraction finishes, it can be then reverted back into a fully licensed bar where we can take parties down there, as well as people just visiting on an ad hoc basis. So those are the three main areas that we're looking to develop in the project. Here are some renderings of what we think it's going to look like. So here you've got part of the history and heritage site. There's a bomber there being attacked by a Spitfire with all of the kind of graphics on the side, using technology that we're talking to suppliers with about, and Special Operations Executive. This is what it could look like. This is actually a scene from Skyfall, not in our tunnels, but in a tunnel similar to ours, smaller in diameter, 12 feet. Our tunnels are 16'6", but they look very similar to this. Interestingly, since we've had all the media attention, we've had a lot of requests for filming down in the tunnels. So you can see that it's an interesting space for anyone to make a film on different types of subjects. This is the culture, the art and culture experience that we think will be a very attractive kind of renewing model in terms of people coming down more than once. Could be a kind of display like this, a kind of nature display, or it could be some kind of art display. But our intention is to joint venture and team up with those kind of providers, both in the UK and abroad. And this is a schematic of what we think the bar will look like. So that should be lots of fun. So the bar, the experience would open, say, at 7 o'clock in the morning, and so 7 to 11 o'clock in the morning, go to about 7 p.m. in the evening, and you can buy your ticket to go down there and post 7 o'clock in the evening to 1 o'clock in the morning, use as a bar. So we think this is attractive, and we hope that you kind of think that it sounds like a very interesting proposition. But what's the data to back up about how we feel that the visitors, how that's going to pan out, and what that means for revenue. So this shows, as I mentioned, that London is the most visited city in the Western world. It's probably the third most visited city in the world, after Hong Kong and Bangkok. We know that there's a lot of people who come here, and who we think would be interested in coming down and see this part of our history. This was the media attention I mentioned. 6.3 billion people reached, 166 publications. Just a huge amount of interest in this project, because it is unique, and it's certainly nothing like this is being developed anywhere else in the world. This is our kind of the model part of it. So when you look at, we've done the analysis obviously on competing projects. They're obviously mature in London. You've got the London Eye, Madame Tussauds. As I mentioned, they're kind of a similar scale to what we're planning. So very simple model, ticket price around about that £30 mark. Take away the cost of running it, and you come out with a revenue number. We think that revenue number somewhere between 80 and 90 million pounds per annum, to give it the same kind of valuation as I mentioned, 600 million pounds plus that we think the London Eye and Madame Tussauds are valued at. And then that's the model. Very, very simple. Our answering broker, ABN AMRO, produced this slide. Really, what it's to show is that on the top there, you can see the tourist expectations, both international and domestic, continues to grow, and then our share expected of those visits to give this model where our view is that we can get up to 3 million. It's certainly got a capacity for up to 3 million people per year, but up to 3 million people visiting the London Eye. Obviously, always difficult to fully analyse the speed with which the tourists will come into the tunnels. But as an example, 25 years ago, which was the last major attraction opened in London, which was the London Eye, they were pretty much at capacity within the first year. So there's every ability for us to kind of replicate that. I talked about monopolistic, and I talked about other projects. There have been some projects in London which have been planned mostly on the outskirts, because they all have to be above ground. All three, for one reason or other, will all turn down by planning. So there may be some other projects which come up, but they're not going to be the same as ours. They won't have the same heritage. Ours already exists, so there is an absolute history to ours, and it's in the centre of London, which we don't think anyone else is going to be able to replicate. Board is under a regulated regulated exchange, and we follow the QCA rules and governance. You can imagine the board is, as you would expect, with two independent directors and the other NEDs. And as I mentioned, we listed on Euronext in June, and we've got the ability to trade in the UK as well via market makers who are offering shares through the platforms like Torrey, Lansdowne, AJ, etc. And so I mentioned at the beginning, it's all very well me talking about this, and I hope you've got a real flavour for what we're trying to do and how exciting this project is. But there's no there's nothing like seeing it for yourselves. So what we would encourage you is to go onto the website. Here you can see there's a kind of link there you can click on, a few short questions, and then we can come back to you about when the next visits are. We have got a little thing there about whether you're a shareholder or not, because obviously, we've had a lot of demand for people to go down into the tunnels, and we would obviously want to prioritise shareholders rather than non-shareholders at this time. So, in conclusion, as I mentioned, the last major historical heritage attraction in London, we believe, don't think can be replicated. Something which is as large scale as this, of up to 3 million visitors per year into central London. It fits very neatly into that whole concept of London being the most visited city in the Western world, and we've been extremely lucky to find this set of tasks within London. And there is obviously history on the reasoning for that, but it's a fantastic confluence of events that allows us to get this project underway. We have an experienced management team, and you would expect us to appoint at some stage an operator. We've surrounded ourselves with incredible advisors. As an example, Wilkinson, the architects who are behind the Battersea Power Station redevelopment, they're working with us. And then going forward, as we develop the tunnels and we get it ready for operation, as I said, you would expect us to be announcing a venture with a world-class operator. We're in the process of raising equity and capital. We've raised and had committed funds of over 20 million. The project itself is going to need something like 140 million in project finance. So we're in that process of raising that capital for the project as we go forward. On Euronext, the company is valued at somewhere between 130 and 170 million. It's currently trading at £2.18. And that's reflecting the project. What the excitement of that project, what it bring to investors in terms of valuation and performance going forward. And as the final part of it is that it's a very simple structure. I don't think it takes. I mean, we're very grateful that Edison have written a report on us, but actually, when you actually look at the levers on it, it's a simple project. It's just about getting what those levers are and getting them accurate to kind of find an accurate valuation. But that's it. Many thanks for your time. Obviously, look forward to any Q&A you have on it. And as I said, we'd be delighted to be down to welcome you down there if you want to come and visit. Thank you, Russell.
Well, Charles, thank you for a very interesting presentation. I can definitely recommend a visit down to the tunnels. I've been there, so much fun. Very welcome to ask questions on the chat. So please send those in if you have any. Charles, let me start off with a question. Could you just talk about what the key stages are in the development of the tunnel over the next few years? So I know visitors are allowed down there at various times.
Yeah, so obviously the first key stage was to get planning, which we've received. And once we received the planning, we can now move on to the next stages in terms of the project development. So working with our architects, we're now under REBA 3 and 4. These are the kind of stages where you're getting into the detail of where anything goes, the technology, light switches, safety and security, the sprinkler systems, etc. And that when you look at our plans, we're aiming to open late 27, early 28. This next part is about the planning to actually refurbish those tunnels, and then concurrent with that, we're raising the project finance, and then announcing an operator and various other joint venture partners as we go forward to provide all of the equipment and technology into opening. So right now we're focusing on getting those next stages, the Reaper 3 and 4. One of the things that I didn't really say earlier is that we could operate these tunnels right now as an attraction. We don't want to do that because our plan is to open it up as a major tourist attraction. But we'll be doing some ticketed tours over the course of the next year. But because of the scale of the tunnels, we can do that at the same time as building up into the construction phase as well. So that's a kind of shorter term revenue opportunity, and the opportunity for people to go down and experience the tunnels as they are, with all of their kind of history and heritage components which are down there at the moment.
Thanks. And what are the key issues in that refurbishment? I mean, obviously, could you talk about things like asbestos, utilities, that type of thing?
So we do have some asbestos down there. It's nothing to be concerned about because 1.5 million properties in the UK have asbestos, and something like 400,000 of those are in commercial spaces. So if you remember this, let me just go back to the slide very quickly, which showed the tunnel as it is. Excuse me. Yeah, so you can see the exhaust pipes running above the generating equipment. Now, they have asbestos on them, and that was a kind of heat exchange material, stopping the tunnels getting over hot when the generators were running. In our planning approvals, we have a full plan to remove those exhausts. There's four of those generating plants in tunnels. We move all of the exhaust to the ground level. There's a company which we've had quotes on removing those exhausts. That's the only spot of any asbestos in the tunnels. And as I said, through full planning on that. Other than that, and like I was saying, the tunnels were fully massively over-engineered, as only the Brits can really do with these kind of things. So in terms of water ingress, nothing. Obviously very stable. They've been there for whatever it is, 70, 80 years. There's very few other issues. We have to do a few things. Do some work on some of the lift shafts to get them ready for tourists to come down. There's some work above ground on some of the tourist welcome sites. But other than that, it's about the planning stage of getting the tunnels ready for tourists late 27, early 28.
Okay, and you have 2 long tunnels and 4 shorter tunnels. Could you just talk about what the plans at the moment are for what the different functions of those various tunnels, and potentially how much they change through the year as different things happen at different stages of the year?
Yeah, so the way that we are planning this is that you have 2 entrance points effectively into the tunnel network. I don't know, can you see my cursor on that? Okay.
I can't. But
this will be, so full place would be the major tourist welcome. So everyone would come in there, have a bit of a briefing. There's going to be a shop there, not surprisingly, and the ability to leave things like rucksacks and bags, etc. With the security conscience, we have to make sure that nothing is going down into the tunnels that could be an issue. So the tourists all have to come through, visitors all have to come through there. And then if you have decided to do the heritage and history tour, you would go down the lift shaft there, and that heritage tour would be along those tunnels, the northernmost tunnel eastwards. And then you would get to the area of tunnels where, just past where the kind of larger diameter tunnels kind of go back through that and then back along the southernmost part tunnel, and then to the west of Forward Place. That's where the license bar is. So we would offer everyone who's going down to do the heritage and history tour, to buy a ticket to go into the license bar and have a drink or have a photo taken or whatever it is as part of the attraction and part of the idea. We think that the average day would be somewhere between 1 and 1.5 hours. At any one time, there would be over 800 people in the tunnels. So you can imagine that the shaft at Fullwood Place, the double-decker, quite wide, take quite a few people down. They go and walk through with tour guides or whatever it is through the tunnel, the history and heritage, and then go back up again. The other end is the entrance point for the culture and art part of it. So be using the kind of the larger diameter but shorter tunnels to get that experience with all of the technology we put to bear. Whether it's kind of an art type of exhibition or a film or whatever it is, that's where you would go down and be in that kind of cultural and art experience area, and then walk out through the southern tunnel, back through the bar, and back up again to the same entrance for the everyone comes into the visitor centre initially. So that's kind of how we envisage. So you can split your trip. So you could go and say, look, I just want to go down and do the history and heritage, or just want to do the culture, and that's where we see, repeat visitors coming through. So you might only want to do the history and heritage bit once, although we will be changing those exhibitions. You might want to come down and do the arts and culture a number of times, because there's a whole bunch of different exhibitions that we were going to regularly show.
Okay, so one of the questions that's come in is the Tux Court exit open? Apologies, I don't know where Tux Court is. I don't think it is. I'd have to come back to that question. The two main ones are on Fern Street, Fullwood Place. There is another lift shaft, and there's also an exit theoretically onto the tube station, although it's blocked off now. And one of the things that we're going to be doing is putting a screen. What we would like to do is put a screen where that old exit was. So in the wall, what was meant to happen is that you go down into the tube network and then go down into the tunnels, during a break. And that was your entrance into the tunnels. But of course, with the post office coming in, those other lift shafts were built for their equipment, people, etc. So we don't have to use that exit, and obviously we wouldn't have permission to do it because it's part of the tube network. But we'd put, it'd be fantastic, wouldn't it, to put screens on where that old exit is, showing exactly what's going on down beneath the tube network. But at this moment, I don't think we're going to be able to open that bit up again. Okay, and you touched on this earlier, in that there's certain things that you can't do down below ground, and for some people, being underground will be an issue as much as it is for people being in a plastic bubble on a big wheel on the south side of the river. So, could you just talk about some things that what people won't be allowed to do down there, what they're not allowed to take, etc.
Yeah, so I mentioned that obviously we've got to be very cognizant of health and safety. So, people will not be able to bring bags and things like that down into the tunnels. With lockers for those, and we're not going to be searching people, but it's not going to be something that you can go down and with a rucksack or anything like that. The tunnels are by nature accessible. They're pretty flat. They slope a little bit, but they're flat. So you can imagine any disability access is really good, and we'll make sure that works really well. I don't think there's going to be too many issues there around the risks and whatever. One of the things obviously we have to put in will be a sprinkler system, a sprinkler system going throughout the tunnels. That will probably be above ground not above ground, but in a basement level in terms of where the water reservoir is kept. And then the sprinkler system would work throughout the tunnels. But There is plenty of ventilation. Anyone who goes down there will realise that you don't really change much in temperature over the year, but you get plenty of ventilation. I've been down there a few times, and you never feel like you're. And the sheer scale of the well, Russell, you don't feel like you're enclosed. If you can go down into a tube, you'll have no problems going down into these tunnels. They're going to be fully lit. They are bigger than a tube. The Eurostar ones are massive, and they're accessible. So we feel it's an easy space for people to go down to. But of course, if people do have claustrophobic issues, they shouldn't really try and come down. And we will be asking questions around that at the surface when people come along and ask to go down.
Great, thanks. And there's a lot has happened already. So could you just talk about who supported the investment so far?
Yeah, so as I said, we're in the process of capital raising. We've talked to a lot of investors. We've got mainly at the present time family offices, high net worth individuals who are invested. We are now at the stage, now that we're listed, we've got planning approvals, that we go talk more to institutional investors. We really want UK-focused institutional investors to be a part of this journey. We've been speaking and been supported to debt providers as well. So it's a number of different investors. My background, as you mentioned, is investment banking. So we've been talking to a lot of the counterparties that I'm very familiar with. And Angus Murray, who's the CEO, is also an ex-investment banker as well. So, the idea is that we want this to be a UK project that is invested in by the UK, by UK investors. We feel that retail investors should have a real part of this project because it is so embedded in our culture. We think it's exactly the type of thing that retail investors, particularly UK retail investors, will be interested in. Also one of the reasons that we listed on Euronext in Amsterdam was to access European capital markets. We're being asked on that by our broker over there.
Thanks. And I've got one question, which probably is asking for a bit of a financial forecast. I'll ask the question, and you may choose to answer it or not answer as you wish. First of all, thank you for a very interesting presentation. I see that the design capacity is £108 million in 2028. What do you think that will ultimately become as you move forward? And what would be your expected EBITDA at that point?
I don't really want to run into the detailed analysis, but suffice to say, obviously you've written a report on this, Russell. So I would point the questioner to kind of read the report that you've put out, which is an excellent report. ABN AMRO also have written an initiation valuation report on the project. I mean, look, those numbers I think are very viable. Obviously, we dictate cost price pressures over the next couple of years, but like I mentioned before, the amount of planning, the kind of groups that we've surrounded ourselves look at this. We've had a number of valuation reports and a number of projection revenue reports that we've had done on the company. I would say is that we've got a pretty good handle on what this company should be generating. But I would point your questioner back to the same points I made earlier about this is a simple structure. It is about what is the ticket price. So you've got a range of ticket prices for these types of attractions in London. We think it's going to be around the £36 mark as an example. And then what does it cost to operate it? And then we'll have a kind of much stronger feel for that once we've been able to announce an operator. And then all kinds of assumptions around that. You've made assumptions around that, and then that spits out your revenue number and ultimately what your EBITDA number would be. And we, as I said, I think we feel that it's going to be in that range, 80 to 90 million pounds of revenue, which would then we think give a valuation of close to where London Eye and Madame Tussauds would sit.
Well, Charles, thank you for the plug for the note, which is available on the website, obviously. We have no more questions coming in, so with just reaching 45 minutes, that feels like a good place to end. So thank you very much for your time.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Russell. Thank you everyone for listening, and thank you for your questions. As I said, we'd be delighted to see you there, and also, be very delighted to come back and give you updates as we progress with this fantastically exciting project. Thank you very much.